On a warm summer evening in 2013, a little girl named Emily hopped onto her bright red bicycle and waved goodbye to her parents as she pedaled down the quiet neighborhood street. She had just turned 10 and loved to explore the area, always returning home with stories of her little adventures. That evening, her parents watched her disappear down the road, not realizing it would be the last time they'd see her. Emily's bike was found lying in a patch of grass a few blocks away, but Emily was nowhere to be seen. For weeks, the community rallied together, putting up missing posters on telephone poles, organizing search parties that scoured the woods and abandoned lots nearby. Helicopters hovered above, and volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through fields, hoping for a sign. The small town of Willow Creek was known for its quiet streets and friendly neighbors, so this sudden disappearance felt like a punch in the gut. Emily was the kind of kid who never wandered too far and always kept her parents in the loop. Her sudden vanishing was like a crack in the heart of the town, and as days turned into weeks, the hope that she'd come back alive slowly faded. 12 years passed. The story of Emily's disappearance became a local legend, whispered about in hushed tones by those who remembered that summer night. New families moved into the neighborhood, some never even knowing about the little girl who vanished without a trace. The house Emily grew up in was eventually sold to another family, and life in Willow Creek went on, though a lingering sadness seemed to shadow the place. This brings us to the old white house at the end of Maple Street, where a young couple named Lily and Mark had just moved in. They were newlyweds, excited to start their life together, and had big plans to transform the rundown property into their dream home. The house had good bones, but it had been empty for years, with creaky floorboards and a musty smell that clung to the walls. Determined to breathe new life into it, they rolled up their sleeves and got to work. The couple's first big project was the kitchen. They wanted to tear down a wall to open up the space, making it more modern and inviting. Mark swung the hammer with determination, while Lily swept up the plaster dust. They joked and laughed, ignoring the eerie feeling that seemed to hang over the place, the sort of chill that made the hairs on your neck stand up. At first, they chalked it up to the creaks and groans of an old house. But as they kept working, it felt like the house was trying to tell them something, whispering in the silence of the empty rooms. One afternoon, as they were removing old cabinets, Mark's hammer hit something hollow behind the wall. At first, he thought it was just a weird patch of old drywall, but as he pressed his ear to the surface, he realized there was something behind it. Lily leaned in, curiosity shining in her eyes. Mark knocked again, and the hollow sound echoed back at them like a drumbeat. They looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. With careful swings, Mark pried away the paneling, revealing a small, dark cavity hidden behind the kitchen wall. It was dusty and cramped, but there was definitely something inside. Lily shone a flashlight into the space, her breath catching as the beam of light revealed a small, battered wooden box. It was covered in cobwebs and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. They exchanged a nervous glance. The air felt heavier somehow, like the house itself was holding its breath. Mark carefully reached in and pulled the box out, setting it gently on the kitchen counter. It was locked with a rusty old latch that creaked as he fiddled with it. Finally, with a loud pop, the latch broke open, and Mark lifted the lid. Inside the box was a faded photograph of a young girl on a red bicycle. Her smile was bright, her pigtails bouncing as she posed for the camera. Lily recognized the face immediately. It was the same little girl whose face had haunted the town for over a decade. Next to the photo was a small, pink hair clip, the kind you'd find in any little girl's bathroom, and a tiny, hand-drawn map. The map had no street names, just lines and landmarks, but it seemed to point to a place deep in the woods behind the house. Lily and Mark stared at the box, their hearts pounding. They had heard whispers about Emily's disappearance, but had never imagined finding something like this in their own home. It felt like they had stumbled into a ghost story, but the objects in the box were real, tangible proof that Emily had been there, or at least that someone wanted them to believe she had. The couple didn't know what to do next. Should they call the police? Show the box to Emily's parents, who still lived in town? Or should they follow the map themselves, driven by a mix of dread and curiosity? The map seemed to be pulling them in, whispering promises of answers that had eluded the town for so long. As the sun began to set, the golden light streaming through the dusty windows, Lily and Mark decided to take a walk to clear their heads. But as they stepped outside, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, as if the trees themselves were leaning in closer, listening to every breath. The once inviting woods now looked like a dark maze, and the map in Lily's hand felt like both a key and a curse. They paused at the edge of the forest, the last rays of light slipping away behind the trees. Mark took Lily's hand, and she clutched the map tighter, her knuckles white. They had a choice to make, to turn back and pretend they never found the box, or to take the first step into the darkness and see where the path led. As the wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the faintest echo of a child's laughter, they knew that whatever was waiting for them in the woods was something they had to face. They took one final look at each other, a silent promise passing between them, and stepped into the shadows. What they would find, or who they would find, was a mystery that would change everything they thought they knew about the night Emily disappeared. And as they disappeared into the darkness of the forest, the old house stood silent once more, as if it had finally let go of a secret it had kept hidden for far too long. Lily and Mark could feel their hearts beating faster with every step they took into the woods. The forest behind the house had always seemed peaceful in the daylight, but now, as the sky turned from gold to deep purple, the shadows seemed to stretch out, swallowing the path in front of them. The map in Lily's hand was old and crinkled, the lines fading in places, but she clutched it like it was a lifeline. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the rustling of the leaves beneath her boots. Mark squeezed her hand. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked quietly, his voice just above a whisper. Lily nodded. She felt like they had to. The photograph of Emily had done something to her heart. It was as if the little girl was calling out to her from the past, begging not to be forgotten. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees grew closer together, their branches clawing at the darkening sky. Every sound, a snapping twig, the distant cry of an owl, made them jump. The air felt colder, and a damp smell rose from the ground. Lily tried to match the landmarks on the map to what she could see around her: a large oak tree, a moss-covered boulder, a tiny creek that glistened in the fading light. They stopped near the boulder, checking the map again. It was here that Emily's map had marked an X, but there was no sign of anything unusual. Mark took the flashlight from his pocket and scanned the area, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. In the pool of light, something glimmered beneath the fallen leaves, a small, rusted tin box, half buried in the dirt. Lily reached down and dug it out, her fingers trembling. She brushed the dirt from the top, and Mark leaned in to get a closer look. The box felt cold and heavy in her hands, as if it carried the weight of all those years. She opened it slowly, afraid of what they might find inside. Inside the tin box was a collection of small trinkets, a single ballet slipper, a plastic toy horse, a marble that caught the light in a swirl of colors. And at the bottom, folded carefully, was a piece of paper. Lily unfolded it with shaking fingers. It was a page torn from a notebook, covered in a child's handwriting. The words were faded, but she could just make them out. "If you find this, please help me. I'm so scared. I don't know where I am. I hear them outside. Please tell my mom and dad I love them." Lily felt tears welling up in her eyes. She could almost hear Emily's small voice in the words, the fear and the hope all tangled together. Mark rested a hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into him, trying to steady her racing heart. "We have to tell someone," Mark said, his voice hushed but urgent. Lily nodded, but she wasn't sure who they could turn to. The note was so old, and they had no idea what it meant. Was it just a child's game, or a real cry for help from a girl who never came home? As they stood there, the woods seemed to grow even darker, the wind picking up and rustling the branches overhead. Lily tucked the note into her pocket and closed the box, her fingers lingering on the cold metal. She felt like they were being watched, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what they would do next. On the way back to the house, neither of them spoke. The flashlight cast long, shifting shadows on the trees, and every step felt like an echo of the past. When they finally reached the edge of the woods, they turned back for a moment, as if expecting to see Emily standing there in the darkness, her red bicycle beside her, waiting to come home. But there was nothing, only the sound of the wind and the soft creak of the old house settling in the night. Back inside, Lily and Mark sat at the kitchen table, the tin box and its contents spread out between them. The photograph of Emily looked almost alive in the flickering candlelight, her smile frozen in that moment of innocence. They talked in low voices, piecing together what little they knew. Mark remembered that there had been rumors when Emily first disappeared, stories about an old man who lived in the woods, about a hidden place no one could find. Lily shivered at the thought. She had never believed in those kinds of stories, but the note and the map felt too real to ignore. They decided to do some digging. Mark pulled out his laptop and started searching online for any news articles or old police reports about Emily's disappearance. He found a few clippings from the local paper, the headline stark and cold: 10-year-old girl vanishes while riding her bike. Search continues for missing Willow Creek girl. Family holds out hope. One article caught his eye. It was an interview with Emily's parents a year after she vanished. They spoke about how Emily had been a curious, fearless little girl who loved to ride her bike and explore the woods. Her mother said she had a wild imagination, always making up stories about fairies and hidden places in the forest. But her father had seemed convinced that Emily hadn't just wandered off. He said there was something in those woods, something that had taken her. Lily shivered as she read the words. She could almost hear the father's voice in her head, the quiet desperation in his belief. "Do you think they ever found out what happened to her?" she asked. Mark shook his head. No one ever did. The case just went cold. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. But maybe there's someone who still remembers. Someone who knows more than they ever said. They decided to talk to the neighbors the next day. Maybe someone had seen something all those years ago, something they hadn't shared with the police. Or maybe someone knew who had lived in the woods back then, the old man in the stories. Lily felt a flicker of hope in her chest, though it was tangled with dread. She knew they were stirring up something that had been buried for a long time. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the wind outside tapping at the windows like cold fingers. She kept thinking about the note, about the fear in those words. "Please help me. I'm so scared." She could almost hear Emily's voice in the darkness, calling out across the years. Mark slept fitfully beside her, but even in sleep, he looked troubled, his brow furrowed like he was dreaming of something he couldn't quite escape. Lily reached out and took his hand, holding it tight, as if she could anchor them both to the safety of the present. But deep down, she knew the past was closer than she wanted to admit. The house, the woods, the box, they were all threads in the same dark web. And somewhere in that web was the truth about what had happened to Emily. The next morning, they set out early, knocking on doors and talking to the older neighbors who had lived in Willow Creek back then. Most of them just shook their heads, their eyes sad and distant. Some didn't even remember Emily at all, or claimed they had moved to the town after she disappeared. But there was one old woman, Mrs. Harland, who invited them in for tea. She lived just down the street, in a little white cottage with rose bushes crowding the porch. Her hands were gnarled with age, but her eyes were sharp as she listened to their story. When Lily showed her the photograph of Emily, Mrs. Harland's eyes filled with tears. "I remember her," she said softly. "She used to ride her bike up and down this street every evening. Sweet little thing." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window. "It was a terrible thing, what happened. But I always believed there was more to it." "What do you mean?" Mark asked gently. Mrs. Harland hesitated, then leaned in closer. "There were stories, even back then," she said in a hushed voice. "About a place in the woods, a place where children sometimes went and didn't come back. Old stories, passed down from when this land was still wild. I don't know if I believe them, but..." She trailed off, her eyes far away. "Emily wasn't the first to disappear, and I'm not sure she was the last." The words sent a chill through Lily's heart. She thanked Mrs. Harland and promised to be careful. As they left the cottage, Lily glanced back at the house at the end of Maple Street. It looked so normal, so harmless in the bright morning light. But she knew now that the truth was hidden in the shadows, waiting for them to dig it up. As they walked back home, the wind picked up, rattling the branches of the old oak trees. The map was still in Lily's pocket, a silent promise of answers yet to come. And as they stepped onto the creaky porch of their old house, they both felt it. That sense of something unfinished, something waiting in the darkness, just out of reach. Lily couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Harland had said. The idea that Emily wasn't the first child to vanish in the woods gnawed at her like a cold hand in the dark. When she and Mark returned home, they sat at the kitchen table again, the house feeling heavier with each passing hour. They pulled out the map once more, tracing the faded lines with their fingers, trying to find some meaning in the tangled mess of memories and rumors. Mark suggested they take another look at the woods in the daylight, but Lily hesitated. Something about the forest's dark heart, the way it seemed to watch them, left her feeling like she was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't quite see. But she knew they couldn't stop now. They were too far in. The next morning, they packed some snacks, a thermos of coffee, and a pair of sturdy flashlights. The sun was just starting to break through the clouds, and the woods looked almost inviting, the leaves glistening with dew. But the map in Lily's pocket felt like a weight, pulling her deeper into a story that was far from over. They decided to follow the map again, this time in full daylight. The forest smelled of damp earth and pine, the air crisp and cold. As they walked, they talked about Emily and the other children Mrs. Harland had mentioned. Lily wondered how many families had lived with that kind of loss, how many other stories had been buried in the dirt beneath their feet. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, their branches forming a green tunnel that shut out the sky. It was quiet except for the occasional call of a bird or the crackle of twigs underfoot. They stopped at the boulder where they had found the tin box, but this time they kept going, following the map's winding path deeper into the forest. After a while, they came to a small clearing, where the ground was covered in moss and the air smelled like rain. In the center of the clearing was an old well, its stones crumbling and covered in vines. Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something almost sacred about the place, like it was holding a secret in its deep, dark throat. Mark peered into the well, shining his flashlight down into the darkness. "It's dry," he said softly, "but it goes down pretty far." Lily couldn't see the bottom, just the rough stones and the way the light seemed to get swallowed up in the blackness. She imagined Emily standing at the edge of the well all those years ago, peering down into the same darkness. They didn't linger long. Something about the well felt wrong, like it was watching them. They marked the spot on the map and moved on, their footsteps softer now, their voices hushed. Back at the house, Lily felt the walls closing in around her. She spent the afternoon reading old newspaper articles, trying to piece together a timeline of Emily's disappearance. She found an old blog post by someone who claimed to have grown up in Willow Creek. The post talked about how the woods had always been a place of mystery, how kids would dare each other to spend the night there, how they'd whisper stories about lights in the trees and voices in the dark. One part of the blog stuck with her, a mention of an old cabin deep in the woods, a place that didn't show up on any maps. Some said it had been built by a hermit who didn't want to be found. Others claimed it was a place where bad things happened, where the forest itself seemed to close in around you. Lily felt a chill as she read the words. She showed the post to Mark, and he nodded gravely. Maybe that's what Emily's map was leading to, he said. That cabin. If it's really there, it could be the missing piece of the puzzle. They decided to take another trip into the woods the next day, this time with a metal detector they borrowed from a friend. Lily hoped they'd find some clue, some forgotten trace of Emily's last moments. But as the day wore on and the sun began to dip low in the sky, they found nothing but old bottle caps, rusted nails, and bits of metal buried in the dirt. Still, they didn't give up. That night, Lily couldn't sleep again. She lay in bed, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house, her mind replaying every detail they'd uncovered. She thought about the photograph of Emily, her bright smile frozen in time. She thought about the note in the tin box, the desperate plea for help. And she thought about the stories Mrs. Harland had shared, the half-remembered whispers of children lost in the woods. The next day, Lily and Mark visited Emily's parents. They had been hesitant at first, worried about dredging up old pain, but they knew they had to try. The house was small and neat, the lawn freshly mowed, but there was a sadness there that no amount of paint or flowers could cover up. Emily's mother answered the door. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes looked tired, but she welcomed them in with a kind smile. They sat in the living room, surrounded by family photos, and Lily told her everything they had found, the photograph, the tin box, the map. Emily's mother listened without interrupting, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Lily showed her the map, she traced the lines with a finger, her eyes distant. Emily always loved exploring, she said softly. She'd come home with little treasures, rocks, flowers, anything that caught her eye. But I never thought, she stopped, her voice catching. Mark leaned forward. Do you know if Emily ever mentioned someone in the woods? Or a place she liked to go? He asked gently. Emily's mother shook her head. She never said much. But there were times she'd come home with that look in her eyes, like she'd seen something she couldn't quite explain. She paused, her brow furrowing. There was one thing, though. She used to talk about a friend, someone she met in the woods. She said he was nice, that he told her stories. Her voice broke. I thought she was just playing make-believe. Lily felt a cold knot form in her stomach. A friend in the woods. Was it real, or just a child's story? Either way, it made her feel like they were getting closer to something, even if that something was wrapped in darkness. As they left the house, Lily glanced back at Emily's mother, who stood in the doorway watching them go. She looked so small and alone, a woman whose world had been turned upside down and never put back together. That night, Lily and Mark sat outside on the porch, the map spread between them. The air was cool and smelled of pine, and the stars blinked overhead like distant eyes. "We're missing something," Lily said softly. "The map, the cabin, the well, it's all connected somehow." Mark nodded. "We just have to keep going," he said. "We're so close." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the quiet of the night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, its voice low and haunting. Lily shivered. She felt like the forest was waiting for them, like it was holding its secrets just out of reach. But she wasn't ready to give up. She knew there was more to the story, something buried in the dirt and the trees, something that had been waiting 12 long years to be found. The next morning, Lily woke up with a heaviness in her chest, like the weight of the past was pressing down on her ribs. She and Mark packed up a backpack with snacks, water, and the map they had studied over and over again. The sun was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, casting a gray light over everything. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what they were about to find. They set off into the woods without saying much. The forest was alive with the rustling of leaves and the whisper of wind through the branches. Every sound seemed to echo a little too loudly, and Lily couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow slipping between the trees. They followed the map carefully, their steps slow and measured. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest. The air grew cooler, and the trees closed in around them, their trunks gnarled and ancient. It was a place that felt untouched by time, a place that had been waiting for them. When they reached the clearing with the well, they paused. The stones were slick with moss, and the air smelled of damp earth and decay. Mark knelt beside it again, peering into the darkness. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Lily strained her ears and thought she heard something faint, a soft, distant sound, like a voice carried on the wind. She shivered and took his hand, squeezing it tight. They didn't linger long at the well this time. The map showed another path leading away from it, deeper into the woods. They followed it, the air growing colder with every step. The path became overgrown, and they had to push through tangled branches and brambles that scratched at their arms. But they kept going, driven by something neither of them could name. Finally, after what felt like hours, they saw it, a small cabin, half hidden by the trees. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, its roof sagging, the windows dark and empty. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, and the wood was weathered and gray. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She felt like she was staring at something out of a nightmare. Mark stepped forward cautiously, testing the steps that led up to the porch. They creaked under his weight, but he didn't stop. He pushed the door open slowly, and it swung inward with a groan. The smell that drifted out was musty and sharp, like rotting wood and old memories. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, and cobwebs clung to the corners. Broken furniture lay scattered around the room, and the walls were covered in faded wallpaper that was peeling away in long, curling strips. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. They moved slowly through the cabin, their footsteps muffled by the dust. In the corner, an old rocking chair sat facing the window, its seat cracked and splintered. On a small table nearby lay a child's doll, its porcelain face chipped and its eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Lily picked it up and felt a chill run down her spine. It felt wrong, like it was out of place, a relic of something that should have stayed buried. Mark was looking at the walls. He ran his fingers over the faded wallpaper, and when he pulled them back, there was a smear of something dark and old, like dried blood. He didn't say anything, but Lily saw the look in his eyes. They both knew this place had seen things it shouldn't have. They found a small door at the back of the cabin, half hidden behind a broken dresser. Mark pushed it open, and a narrow staircase led down into darkness. Lily's heart raced. She didn't want to go down there, but she knew they had to. Mark went first, his flashlight cutting a path through the blackness. Lily followed, her steps unsteady on the old wooden stairs. The air grew colder as they descended, and the smell of damp earth grew stronger. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a small basement, the walls rough and uneven. The floor was covered in dirt, and there were old crates stacked against the walls, their wood warped and rotting. In the center of the room was a small table, and on it lay another note, this one yellowed with age, the edges brittle. Lily picked it up carefully, her fingers trembling. The handwriting was small and cramped, and the words sent a chill through her. They said if I was good, I could go home. But I've been here so long. Please, if you find this, don't forget me. Lily pressed the note to her chest, her eyes stinging with tears. She could almost feel Emily's presence there in the darkness, her small voice echoing in the silence. Mark put a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. and they both knew they were closer to the truth than ever before. They didn't linger in the basement. The air felt heavy and oppressive, like it was trying to push them out. As they climbed back up the stairs, the house seemed to groan around them, the old wood shifting under their feet. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the branches of the trees like skeletal fingers. They stood on the porch, looking out at the forest. The cabin felt like a piece of the past that had clawed its way into the present, refusing to be forgotten. Lily took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She knew they couldn't stop now. They had to keep going, to follow every thread of the story until they found the truth. Back at the house, they spread out everything they had found on the kitchen table, the map, the photograph, the notes. The pieces were starting to come together, but there were still gaps, questions that gnawed at them in the quiet of the night. Who was the man Emily had called a friend? What had happened in that cabin, in those dark woods that had swallowed her whole? As they talked late into the night, a storm rolled in, the wind howling outside and rain lashing at the windows. The house creaked and groaned around them, and Lily felt like the past was pressing in on them from all sides. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time, that something was watching them from the shadows. Mark looked at her, his eyes dark and determined. "We're going back tomorrow," he said. "We're going to find out what happened to her, Lily. No more running from it." She nodded, her throat tight. She felt the same fire inside her, the same need to see it through to the end. Whatever was waiting for them in those woods, they were ready to face it. The rain drummed against the roof as they sat in the flickering candlelight, their minds racing with possibilities. Outside, the forest waited in the darkness, its secrets buried deep in the earth. And somewhere out there, the last piece of Emily's story was waiting to be found. The rain had turned the woods into a dripping, muddy maze, but Lily and Mark didn't let that stop them. They woke up before dawn, packing everything they thought they might need. As they walked through the trees, the forest felt more alive than ever. Each step was a squelch of wet leaves and earth, the air thick with the smell of rain and pine. They moved with purpose, following the map once more, but today felt different. There was a charge in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. As they pushed deeper in, they both kept glancing over their shoulders, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with every step. Lily's fingers were cold around the handle of the flashlight she kept clipped to her pack, even though the daylight should have been enough. But today, the sky was dark with heavy clouds, turning the woods into a shadowed labyrinth. They reached the cabin again just as the rain started up again, a steady patter against the sagging roof. Lily took a deep breath, her pulse thudding in her ears. The air smelled of wetwood and something else, something metallic and sharp that made her stomach clench. Mark moved ahead, pushing the door open and stepping inside. The cabin looked even more decayed than it had the day before. The smell of rot was stronger now, like the damp air was pulling old memories out of the walls. They moved slowly, checking every corner, every crack in the floorboards, looking for anything they might have missed. In the back room, where they'd found the note, Mark ran his fingers along the wall, pausing when he felt a soft give beneath the faded wallpaper. He looked at Lily, his eyes wide. "Help me," he said quietly. They peeled back the paper, and behind it was a small wooden panel, old and worn, but clearly out of place. They exchanged a look before Mark slipped his fingers into the crack and pulled. The panel shifted with a groan, and behind it was a narrow crawl space, just big enough for them to squeeze through. Lily's heart thudded in her chest. She felt like they were about to cross some invisible line, stepping into a part of the story they'd never even imagined. Mark went first, ducking into the darkness. Lily followed, the air growing colder around her as she crawled through the narrow tunnel. It smelled of earth and mildew, and she had to fight back a rising sense of panic. The tunnel was tight, the walls pressing in on her, but she kept going, inch by inch. Finally, the tunnel opened into a small hidden room. It was lit only by the flickering beam of their flashlights, but Lily could see enough to know this was a place that hadn't been touched in years. The floor was packed dirt, and in the center of the room was an old trunk, its metal hinges rusted, and its wood splintering. Mark knelt beside it, his hands shaking slightly as he fumbled with the latch. The lock was rusted, but gave way with a crack, and he lifted the lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in a dirty, moth-eaten blanket, was a stack of journals. The leather covers were cracked and brittle, but the pages inside were surprisingly well preserved. Lily reached out and picked one up carefully. The handwriting was small and neat, but as she read the first few lines, her breath caught in her throat. These weren't just random notes. These were Emily's journals. Her voice echoed from the pages, small and frightened, but determined. She wrote about the forest, about the man she met who told her stories, about the cabin. But the further Lily read, the stranger the entries became. Emily described the man in the woods, how he said he could help her find her way home, but only if she kept his secrets. She wrote about the things she'd seen, strange lights in the trees, voices that called to her in the night, and a promise that she would never have to be alone again. Mark read over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. "Do you think she was hallucinating?" he whispered. "Or was there really someone here with her?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know," she said. "But I don't think she was making it up. Not all of it, at least." They spent hours in that hidden room, reading through the journals, piecing together Emily's last days in the forest. The entries grew more desperate as they went on. Emily wrote about how she wanted to go home, but how the man in the woods told her she couldn't, not yet. She wrote about how the forest seemed to change around her, paths twisting and turning until she didn't know which way was out. Lily felt a deep sadness settle over her as she read the final entry. Emily wrote that she was tired, that she missed her family, but she didn't know if she would ever see them again. The last line was scrawled and shaky. "If anyone finds this, please tell my mom I tried to come home." Lily pressed the journal to her chest, her eyes burning with tears. She looked at Mark, and he nodded solemnly. "We have to tell her parents," he said. "They deserve to know." But even as he said it, Lily felt something else stirring in the back of her mind, a question that wouldn't let go. If Emily had been trapped here, who was the man she wrote about? And was he still out there, somewhere in the woods? As they crawled back out of the hidden room, the storm outside had grown stronger, the wind howling through the trees. The cabin creaked and groaned around them, and for a moment, Lily felt like the forest itself was alive, listening to every word they spoke. They stepped outside into the driving rain, the cold water soaking them to the bone. But neither of them cared. They had found the journals, the proof of Emily's last days. It was more than they had hoped for. But it was also more frightening than they had imagined. Because Emily hadn't just vanished, she had been trapped here, in this place that seemed to swallow everything whole. As they walked back through the forest, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. She kept glancing over her shoulder, the shadows shifting in the corners of her vision. Once, she thought she saw a figure standing between the trees, a tall, thin man watching them from the darkness. But when she blinked, he was gone, and the woods were silent except for the rush of the rain. When they reached the house, they were soaked and shivering, but they didn't stop to change. They laid the journals out on the kitchen table, flipping through the pages again and again, searching for anything they might have missed. And that was when Lily noticed something, a name that kept coming up in Emily's writing. A name she hadn't seen before, Mr. Gray. Lily's stomach turned. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling. Emily had written that Mr. Gray lived in the woods, that he was the one who promised to help her find her way home. But the more she wrote, the more she seemed to fear him. The final pages were filled with scribbled warnings, half-finished thoughts. "Mr. Gray is not what he seems. He wants me to stay. I can't leave." Lily looked at Mark, her voice shaking. "Who is Mr. Gray?" she asked, her mind racing. But Mark just shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But I think we need to find out before it's too late." The storm raged on outside, the wind battering the house like a living thing. Lily felt like the forest was pressing in on them, the walls closing tighter with every heartbeat. Somewhere in those dark woods, Mr. Gray was waiting. And she knew, deep down, that he was the key to everything. The storm had eased by the time Lily and Mark made it back into the forest. The trees dripped water from every leaf and branch, the ground soft and spongy beneath their feet. Even though the rain had stopped, the air was thick with mist, turning the world into a gray, shifting dream. They didn't speak much as they walked. The journals had left them both shaken, the name Mr. Gray repeating in their minds like a warning. They knew they had to find out who he was, what he was, before they could leave this place behind for good. The path was harder to follow this time. The map felt almost useless, the lines of ink blurring in the damp air. But Lily felt a pull, an instinct that guided her steps. She kept her eyes on the forest ahead, every sense straining to catch any sign of movement, any whisper of something hidden just out of sight. As they pushed deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, the mist swirling around them like breath. Mark kept glancing at her, his jaw tight. "Are you sure this is the right way?" he asked finally, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I think so," she said, though she wasn't sure how she knew. She just felt it in her bones, like a thread pulling her forward. They walked for what felt like hours, the world narrowing to the sound of their footsteps in the hush of the forest. Finally, they reached a clearing they hadn't seen before. The ground was flat and muddy, the trees circling around it like silent sentinels. In the center stood a small, weathered shack, older even than the cabin, Its wood blackened by years of rain and rot. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She knew, without needing to be told, that this was where it would end. She could feel it in the air, in the way the forest seemed to lean in close, listening. They approached slowly, their footsteps muffled by the wet ground. The door to the shack hung open, creaking softly in the breeze. Inside, the darkness was almost absolute, but they could make out the shapes of old furniture, broken and covered in dust. And in the center of it all, standing as if he'd been waiting for them, was a man. He was tall and thin, his face shadowed beneath the brim of an old hat. His clothes were old-fashioned, the fabric worn and threadbare, but there was something timeless about him, something that made Lily's skin crawl. He smiled at them, a slow, knowing smile that didn't reach his cold, pale eyes. "Hello," he said softly, his voice smooth and deep. "I've been expecting you." Lily's hands shook as she stepped forward. "You're Mr. Gray," she said, her voice trembling. It wasn't a question. She could feel it in her gut. He nodded slowly, his smile never faltering. "I suppose that's what they've called me," he said. "Names don't mean much out here, though. It's the stories that matter." Mark's eyes narrowed. "What did you do to Emily?" he demanded, his voice harsh in the quiet. Mr. Gray's smile widened. "Emily came to me, just like you did," he said calmly. "She was lost, frightened. I offered her a way home, but she had to listen to my stories. That's how it works. You give a little, and you take a little." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. "You kept her here," she said. "You trapped her." Mr. Gray tilted his head, considering her. "I kept her safe," he said softly. "The forest can be cruel, you know. It eats up those who don't understand its rules." Emily understood, eventually. But she was tired, and she wanted to go home. "So I let her go." Lily's breath caught. "You let her go?" she echoed, her mind reeling. Mr. Gray nodded. "The forest took her, just like it takes everything in the end," he said. "But she left something behind to her story. And that's what matters, isn't it?" Mark took a step forward, his fist clenched. "What about the others?" he demanded. "What about the children who vanished? Did you let them go too?" Mr. Gray's smile faded slightly. "Not everyone listens," he said quietly. "Some fight the stories. Some refuse to see. The forest doesn't like that. It keeps them until they're ready to understand." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Lily felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over her. She thought of Emily, of the fear in her words, of the small, desperate hope that she would make it home. She thought of all the others who had vanished, their stories swallowed by the dark. "Why us?" she whispered. "Why are you telling us this?" Mr. Gray's eyes seemed to glow faintly in the gloom. "Because you listened," he said softly. "You found her story, and now it's part of yours. That's how it works. The stories don't end, they just change hands." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The forest was silent, the mist curling around them like a shroud. And then Mr. Gray took a step back, his smile returning. "You can leave now, if you want," he said. "The forest will let you go, but you'll carry the story with you, wherever you go." Lily felt a shiver run through her. She looked at Mark, and he nodded slowly. They turned and walked out of the shack, the mist parting around them. Behind them, Mr. Gray watched, his pale eyes following them until they stepped back into the forest. The walk back felt longer, the weight of what they'd heard pressing down on them with every step. When they finally reached the edge of the woods, the sky had started to clear, a pale sun breaking through the clouds. They stood in the weak light, their clothes damp and muddy, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mark looked at her. "Do you believe him?" he asked quietly. Lily took a deep breath. "I don't know," she said, "but I believe Emily. And I believe that the forest, it's more than just trees and dirt. It's alive. It remembers." They walked back to the house in silence, their minds buzzing. They knew they couldn't stay there forever, but they also knew they couldn't just forget. They had to tell Emily's family, had to let them know that she had tried to come home. That night, as they packed up their things, Lily found one last entry in Emily's journal, tucked in the back cover like a final whisper. It was just a single line, written in shaky, fading ink. "Mr. Gray said I could leave, but he didn't say I'd be free." Lily closed the journal slowly, her heart pounding. She looked out at the forest, the shadows lengthening in the twilight. She knew the stories weren't over. They never really were. And in the darkness, she thought she saw a flicker of movement, a pale figure watching from the edge of the trees. But when she blinked, it was gone, and the forest was silent once more. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a soft golden light filtering through the trees and painting everything in gentle warmth. Lily and Mark stood on the porch of the house, feeling the weight of everything they had seen and learned settling over them like a heavy quilt. The forest seemed different in the daylight, calmer, quieter, almost as if it was resting after sharing its secrets. They spent the morning carefully gathering the journals and everything they'd found, packing them into boxes with a kind of reverence. Each worn page felt like a voice from the past, and they didn't want to leave anything behind that might be lost again. As they worked, Lily kept glancing out at the edge of the woods, half expecting to see Mr. Gray's pale figure standing there, watching. But the forest was still, the only movement the gentle sway of leaves in the breeze. When they were ready to go, they stood together in the doorway, taking one last look at the house. It was old and weathered, but there was something almost peaceful about it now, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Lily took Mark's hand, squeezing it gently. "We're really leaving this time," she said softly. Mark nodded, his face thoughtful. "Yeah," he said. "But part of it's always going to stay with us, isn't it?" Lily smiled faintly, knowing he was right. The forest, the journals, the echoes of Emily's voice, it would always be a part of them now. The walk back through the woods felt easier than before. The forest floor was soft and damp beneath their feet, the air fresh and clean after the storm. Sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling the path ahead in warm light. For the first time in days, Lily felt like she could breathe again. There was no sign of the twisting shadows or the whispers in the dark. It was just the two of them and the quiet hush of the forest. As they walked, they talked about what they would tell Emily's parents, how they would share her final words, the hope she had clung to even in the darkest moments. They both knew it wouldn't be easy, but it felt like the right thing to do, like it was the last piece of the story that needed to be told. Back in town, they found Emily's family at the small white house with the overgrown garden. Her mother answered the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw them standing there with the boxes of journals. Lily took a deep breath, her voice shaking a little as she said, "We found her journals. We think she wanted you to have them." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she took the box from them, her hands trembling. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just held the box close like it was the most precious thing in the world. Finally, she looked up at them, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for bringing her home." It was a small moment, but it felt like a kind of healing, a closing of a chapter that had been left open for far too long. Lily and Mark left the house quietly, their hearts heavy but lighter than they'd been in days. That night, they sat together on the porch of Lily's house, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. They didn't talk much, just shared the quiet peace of the evening. Lily thought about everything they had seen and heard, the stories that had been hidden in the shadows of the forest. She thought about Emily, and how even though she hadn't made it home in the way she'd hoped, her voice had found its way back to the people who loved her. Mark broke the silence softly. "Do you think the forest will ever let go of its secrets completely?" he asked. Lily shook her head. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe it doesn't want to. Maybe the stories are what keep it alive." Mark nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe you're right," he said. "But at least we know the truth now. At least Emily's story won't be forgotten." Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his arm around her. They watched the stars begin to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. The night was clear and calm, the air cool and sweet with the scent of grass and earth. For the first time since they'd started down this path, Lily felt like she could let herself breathe again. Before they turned in for the night, she walked to the edge of the yard, looking out at the dark line of the forest beyond the fields. She thought about Mr. Gray, about the way he had looked at them with those pale eyes that seemed to see right through her. She thought about his words, about the idea that the forest didn't just take, it also gave, in its own way. She wasn't sure if she believed it, but she knew one thing for certain, the forest had changed her, just like it had changed Emily. The next morning, they packed up their things and said goodbye to the house. It felt like the end of a long journey, but also the beginning of something new. As they drove away, the forest receded in the rearview mirror, the trees growing smaller and smaller until they were just a blur of green and gold in the distance. Lily felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of relief. They had faced the darkness, and they had come out the other side. They had found the truth, even if it wasn't the answer they had hoped for. And in the end, that felt like enough. Back in the city, the noise and bustle felt almost unreal after the quiet of the forest. But Lily found herself looking at everything with new eyes, seeing the stories that lived in every crack and shadow. She knew she would never forget the forest, or the girl who had ridden her bike into the trees and never come back. She would carry that story with her, always. A few weeks later, they heard that the old house had been torn down. The land was being cleared, the forest cut back to make way for something new. Lily felt a pang of loss when she heard, but she also felt a quiet hope. Maybe, she thought, it was time for new stories to grow in the place of the old. She and Mark visited Emily's grave on a warm, sunny afternoon. They left a small bouquet of wildflowers, yellow and white, bright against the green grass. Lily knelt for a moment, her fingers brushing the rough stone, and whispered a soft promise. "We didn't forget," she said. "We never will." As they walked away, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of peace settling over her at last. The story had found its end, and she knew it was up to them to carry it forward, to remember, to share, to make sure that the girl in the forest was never lost again. The forest itself would go on, whispering its secrets in the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the wind. And Lily knew that somewhere out there, Mr. Gray's pale figure might still walk between the trees, listening for new voices, new stories. But she also knew that she had found her way back to the light, and that was enough. As she and Mark walked back to the car, hand in hand, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the world in gold. And for the first time in a long while, Lily felt like she could truly breathe. She knew the stories would go on, but she also knew that some stories, once told, could never be lost again.